Hi, I'm Mona from the Leaders Studio. This short video is about having appreciative performance conversations. These conversations use an appreciative and strength-based lens, and the aim is to bring out the best in your team member and contribute to a more positive, engaged, and productive team. There's two things that I'll go through in this video. The first is 4 essentials to keep in mind in having any performance and development related conversations. And secondly, I'll go through a few different scenarios that will help you frame conversations and examples. I will present this information with an assumption that you already have an understanding of the basic assumptions of appreciative inquiry and its methodology. So, the 4 things to keep in mind, these are 4 essentials to keep in mind about any performance related conversations. This will enable them to be more effective and assist in creating that foundation of trust and two-way conversation between you and your team member. So firstly, while these conversations are sometimes quite formal and held at a predetermined date, you can also hold them as opportunities present themselves. So these opportunities could look like you noticing something that you'd like to talk about. If the topic is sensitive, you could have it in private. So anytime there's an issue, a challenge, an area for growth that you've noticed, or a need to celebrate, that's when you can pull the person aside and just have the conversation. The point here is not to have any surprises later down the track and to immediately have the conversation rather than waiting for the predetermined date to address the items. So this helps the person to remember the actual situation that's come up and also for you not to have any surprises. So again, that contributes to building that trust, that foundation of trust. So the second essentials to keep in mind is that I encourage you to have these conversations at a time when you're able to be objective and neutral. This supports you to have and to think with an appreciative lens and to take a strength-based approach. So rather than coming to the discussion with a preconceived outcome or notion of what the outcome will be, remembering that taking an appreciative approach means that you and your team member are co-creating the conversation and therefore any outcomes that might come of it. Thirdly, is that one of your primary roles as a manager is to listen and to ask questions. So not to do all the talking in these performance and development conversations. When you allow your team member to do most of the talking, you can ask key questions and listen to your team members' response and their experiences. This will assist you to gain a better understanding of how they think they are doing and what areas of development or strengths they would like to focus on. So some organizations have established key focus areas for these conversations or performance indicators, and you can base some of your questions on these items in addition to other questions that you might have. The fourth thing to keep in mind is that if you already know what questions you want to ask, in particular if they're set questions asked of all employees, let your team member know prior to having a conversation so that they too can prepare. So you've come prepared, they need the opportunity to prepare as well. If you're having the discussion spontaneously, just understand that you might need to give your team member a few days to come back to you with their thoughts after you've initiated the conversation. So again, these 4 considerations that I've just gone through help to support and build that foundation of trust and an environment that is more conducive to having appreciative performance and development conversations. In addition to these, as mentioned, it's important for you to have an understanding of the basic assumptions of AI and its methodology. So having an appreciative inquiry lens can positively frame questions when discussing performance and development with your team member. With an AI approach, you would generally identify what is working well, discover why it's working well, and then find ways to enable more of it. When you use an AI approach in conversation, you're using language that identifies strengths, enabling your team member to think more creatively and innovatively. So as opposed to becoming defensive, closed off, or unable to generate a win-win situation for themselves, for your team, and for your organization, you're instead creating an environment that is encouraging and conducive to more of these types of conversations. And it makes it easier to have conversations around sensitive topics. So with the traditional approaches, managers might find gaps in performance, highlight the mistakes, and then make a one-sided decision about the solutions. Or in some cases, a manager might not address serious issues or opportunities for development, and perhaps provide a neutral or even mediocre assessment of that team member. So when we want to take an appreciative approach, we'll go through a few examples of how you could phrase and frame appreciative questions. Some of these examples assume that a manager or that you have noticed a challenge or an issue in the workplace, and some assume that you have identified an opportunity or a strength. So whilst appreciative inquiry always starts with an affirmative topic and discovering the strengths, I've used both kinds of scenarios so that you can see how to turn the situation around and reframe the conversation or the situation that you've observed. And I think this will provide you with more ways to apply an AI lens to your conversations. So let's go through 4 examples on how to reframe or have a conversation with an appreciative inquiry lens. The first situation or scenario would be a client or customer service situation. So perhaps as a manager, you've noticed that something isn't quite right and you want to learn a little bit more about what's happening. So you could identify and go straight directly to, for example, a particular individual hasn't answered enough phone calls for that day. If you're an organization that counts a number of phone calls, you could directly go into that. That can take people can take a defensive, response to that. So instead, you might want to take a step back from that particular scenario and just ask the individual, you know what, when have customers or clients been the most pleased with your service, and what can we learn and apply from those moments of success? And just see where that conversation goes. You might want to start with, you know what, I've noticed the phone call numbers are down from your day today or from your week, and I just wanted to have a conversation about when people are most pleased with your service, so that you are being transparent, but that you're also framing it from a strengths approach, and that your team member knows that you're there to support them, that you want to learn more about how to develop them, what their learning needs are, and so on. So that's the first example. The second example is a perception related example. So let's say that you've noticed that your team member, you don't think that they're seeing things the same way as other people are, and you're not sure what kind of lens they're applying to things that they're noticing. So whether you're noticing that they've got a bit of a negative approach or lens to things, or perhaps it's just different. It's not good or bad, and you want to find out more about it. So you could start the conversation off with, you know, what would someone who had a different set of values or perspectives say or do about your situation? This kind of question helps them to potentially see things from another person's point of view, and to actually take a step back. And it also helps you to provide that support and mentoring to help them to do that. So after you've had a bit of a conversation around that question, then you could go into, you know, what's taking shape? What are you hearing underneath the variety of opinions being expressed? What are you hearing underneath the variety of thoughts that you've just shared with me? So continuing to ask questions that enable your team member to think for themselves, and at the same time letting them know that you're asking these questions because you want to learn more about them and you want to offer them more support. The third type of example is an engagement related one. So employee engagement. You've noticed that perhaps there's a bit of a lack of engagement on the part of your team member. So this could look like just not being as productive as usual, potentially coming into work late, and any other indicators that that your employee is just lacking that engagement and motivation towards their work. So again, you could dive straight into if they haven't been coming to work on time, you could dive straight into that and say, hey, you're not showing up to work on time, what's going on? Or you could ask, you could start with that, but then lead into, when are you feeling best about your work? What do you value about the task itself? So if you're noticing that perhaps it's more a holistic engagement issue, you could step back and ask them about that. And then once you've had a conversation around that, you could then get into, okay, well, what is the most meaningful to you about your work? And then as a manager, once you've heard the responses and you've had a conversation around these two questions, you could then identify and co-create with your employee, if it's possible, to create those kind of opportunities for more meaning and more engagement with that employee. The fourth kind of scenario is a growth. So you're seeing an opportunity for growth and development for your employee. And a question you could start off with is, what can we both learn about this situation? So again, that frames it in a way that puts you both into that situation rather than just targeting your employee. And then what opportunities can you see in this situation? And have a conversation around that. If that becomes difficult for them to respond to, you could go with, what has worked well previously and have a conversation around that. So these were 4 different types of topics that you could have conversations around. And remembering, when you do go to frame your conversations, is to have a conversation. It's more of a discovery conversation. It's a neutral discovery. It's not a one-sided closed question. It's not a yes or no, and it's very much curious. You've got a curious lens, and you're trying to learn more about your employee, what motivates them, what engages them, and how you can create more of that together. Thank you for watching this video. Again, I'm Mona from the Leader Studio. If you've got any questions or want any more information on our approach, you can look us up online. Thank you.